Alma's heart pounded in her chest as she knelt by the cassava tubers, the knife shaking in her hands. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the village of Anoma, but Alma could barely feel its warmth. It wasn't the sun that made her sweat. It was the whispers that followed her wherever she went. As she peeled the cassava, she could hear them again, those same voices, ringing in her ears like a song she couldn't escape. Abrokire, Coco. The teasing nickname that made her want to shrink into the earth. But she wasn't a seed to be buried. Was she? The rooster crowed loudly from the far end of the village, and the chatter of the morning market began to swell around her. The children, in their usual flurry of energy, ran past, pointing at her, their laughter cutting through the air. Alma clenched her jaw, her grip tightening on the knife, the sting of their words sinking deeper. Alma, don't let their words stick to you like thorns in your skin. Nana Essie's calm voice broke through the tension. Alma glanced up to see her grandmother, sitting beside her on the low stool. Nana Essie's eyes were soft but full of strength. You are more than what they say. You are like the palm tree, the one that bends but does not break. Alma let out a breath, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the words she had carried all her life had finally found its home. She wanted to believe Nana Essie, but the truth was harder to see. The village was filled with laughter and gossip, but no one ever spoke kindly about Alma. Not really, not like they did about others. I try, Nana, I try so hard, but it still hurts, Alma whispered, her voice barely audible. Nana Essie smiled gently, reaching over to squeeze Alma's hand. The world can mock you, child, but it cannot take away what is yours by right, your spirit. The village square was bustling with the usual morning activity. Stalls lined the dirt road, selling everything from dried fish to woven baskets, and women shouted their wares with cheerful calls. Alma moved through the market, clutching a small basket, her feet dragging with each step. She wasn't in a hurry. In fact, it felt like the world was moving too quickly around her. As she passed the cloth stall, a flash of yellow caught her eye, a vibrant, beautiful fabric that reminded her of the sun. She reached out to touch it, her fingers brushing the smooth, bright threads. The color made her feel lighter, as though it could lift the weight from her shoulders. But just as her fingers grazed the cloth, she heard a familiar voice. Yellow suits her, Kofi said loudly, his tone dripping with mockery. Makes her look like a ripe mango ready to fall. Laughter erupted from his friends, sharp and loud, echoing across the square. Ama froze, her hand still on the fabric, her breath caught in her throat. The world around her seemed to blur, her vision narrowing. She wanted to shout back, to say something, anything, to make the pain stop. But instead, she let go of the cloth and walked away, her heart heavy. The whispers followed her. Abrokir Coco, they echoed, repeating the same cruel words. Alma's face burned, the sting of their laughter still ringing in her ears. Why did I let him get to me, she thought, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed. Why does it matter what they think? She walked toward the edge of the market, where the cool shade of a large mango tree offered some comfort. Beneath its branches, she collapsed onto the ground, her back against the trunk. The tears that had been threatening to spill finally came. Why can't I just be enough, she thought, clutching her chest as if it could hold together the pieces of her heart. Alma spent the next few hours in a haze, trying to ignore the ache in her chest. When the sun reached its highest point, she decided to escape the village for a while. She didn't care where she went, just as long as it was far from the mocking voices. She wandered into the forest, a familiar path winding through the trees until she came to a small clearing by the stream. The sound of the water rushing over the rocks brought her some peace. She sat on a large stone at the edge of the water, staring at her reflection in the rippling surface. Why do I care so much about what they say? She whispered to no one in particular.
The forest answered with the gentle rustle of leaves, but the question remained unanswered.
It was then that she heard it, a soft, almost melodic hum coming from deeper within the trees. Amma looked up, startled, and saw a man sitting under a large baobab tree. He was carving something from wood, his face relaxed and content. "Hello," he called, smiling at her. His voice was warm, like the afternoon sun. "I didn't mean to startle you." Amma hesitated. She wasn't used to strangers, but there was something comforting about his presence. She walked over and sat at a distance. "I'm Adam," he said, setting down his carving tool and dusting off his hands. "And you are?" "Amma," she replied quietly, feeling something shift inside her, an openness she hadn't expected. Adam smiled and gestured to the space beside him. "Come, sit with me. I have stories to share and I'm sure you do too." Amma was skeptical. She didn't know this man, and yet something about him seemed different. Like he understood something about her that she hadn't yet understood herself. "Stories?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Adam nodded, a gleam of mischief in his eyes. "I travel the land, listening to the whispers of the world, gathering stories. And you, Amma, seem like someone who has a tale to tell." The afternoon passed in a blur of stories and laughter. Adam shared tales of distant lands and curious creatures, his voice animated and rich with emotion. Amma found herself laughing, the sound of her own voice a strange but welcome feeling. It had been a long time since she had laughed without feeling ashamed. "Your stories are beautiful," Amma said, wiping a tear from her eye as she caught her breath. "But I don't think I have any stories worth telling." Adam's smile softened. "Why do you think that?" "Every person has a story. Even the quiet ones, the ones who hide in the shadows. You just need to find it." Amma looked down at her hands, still feeling the weight of the ridicule that had followed her all her life. "I don't think anyone wants to hear my story. They only see me for what I am, or what they think I am." Adam's expression grew serious. "And what do you think you are, Amma?" For the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure. I don't know. I want to be something more. But it's hard when everyone sees me the way they do."
Adam's eyes shone with understanding. "The world may try to tell you who you are, Amma, but only you can truly decide." As the day faded into evening, Amma stood at the edge of the forest, feeling something stirred deep within her. She couldn't explain it, but for the first time she didn't feel so small. Adam's words had planted a seed, one that she couldn't ignore. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to find her voice. "Thank you," Amma said, turning back to face Adam, "for the stories, and for reminding me that I'm not just what they say." Adam's smile widened. "You are more than you know, Amma. Now go find your story and tell it to the world." The days following her encounter with Adam felt different. Amma found herself walking a little taller, her steps no longer heavy with the weight of the villagers' laughter. She still heard their teasing whispers, but somehow they didn't sting as much anymore. Her mind often wandered back to the baobab tree in her story, the one that withstood ridicule, only to become the strongest in the forest. Could she be like that tree? As she worked alongside her grandmother in the fields, Amma caught herself humming under her breath. At first, she was surprised. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd felt light enough to sing or hum. Nana Essie noticed, and smiled knowingly. "You've got something on your mind, child," she said, her hands moving steadily through the cassava tubers. Amma hesitated, unsure how to explain. She had spent so long hiding from the world that even now, sharing her thoughts felt foreign. But something inside her urged her to be honest. "I think I'm going to start telling stories, Nana," Amma said quietly. "Not just to you, but to everyone. I want to make them laugh, or at least listen." Nana Essie looked at her, her wrinkled face softening with a gentle warmth. "I knew it. You've always had a gift for storytelling. Don't let anyone take that from you." Amma felt a rush of gratitude in that moment, her grandmother's words wrapping around her like a warm blanket. She didn't know what would come of her decision, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid to try. Amma stood at the edge of the village square the next morning, heart pounding in her chest. The festival was just days away, and it had become a tradition for villagers to gather and share stories, songs, and dances. But this year was different. This year, Alma planned to participate. She had prepared a new story, a playful tale of a cheeky monkey who outsmarted the lion. It was a story she had heard as a child, but now with her new voice, she had put her own twist on it. She wasn't sure who would listen, but she was determined to try. As the evening sun bathed the square in a golden glow, Alma stood near the fire, her stomach twisting with nerves. Villagers gathered around, chatting and laughing. Then Kofi appeared, strutting into the circle with his usual air of arrogance.
He caught sight of Alma and raised an eyebrow. "You're going to tell stories now?" he asked, his voice laced with mockery. His friends chuckled. Alma's stomach tightened, but she refused to let his words derail her. She stepped forward, her heart thudding in her chest. "I am," she said firmly, her voice trembling only slightly, "and I have a story to share." The crowd fell silent, curious but skeptical. Alma took a deep breath and began, her voice gaining strength with each word. The story flowed easily, her words painting a vivid picture of the clever monkey outwitting the mighty lion. Her audience, who had once mocked her, now hung on every word. As the story reached its peak, Alma could feel the energy shift. Laughter filled the air as she delivered the punchline, and even Kofi was caught off guard, his expression softening for the briefest moment. The crowd erupted in applause, and Alma's chest swelled with pride. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not just as the girl they teased, but as someone with something worth listening to. As the days passed, Alma's newfound fame as a storyteller spread like wildfire through Anoma. Every evening, villagers gathered to hear her tales. Even the children who once mocked her were now begging for more stories. It felt like a dream, but with it came something Alma hadn't anticipated: pressure. People expected her to perform, to entertain. And while she was grateful for the attention, there was a part of her that felt like she was losing herself in their expectations. One evening, after finishing a particularly lively story, she overheard a conversation between two women. "She's getting too good," one of them whispered. "Maybe she's more than just a fat girl after all." Alma froze, the words cutting deep. It wasn't the first time she had heard praise, but hearing it like this, like her worth was suddenly tied to her ability to entertain, made her feel uneasy. Was she still Alma, the girl who loved to laugh, to tell stories, or had she become a spectacle for their amusement? The weight of expectation pressed down on Alma as the village festival drew near. She spent every spare moment crafting new tales, determined to impress the crowd. But as she worked, she began to feel the familiar stirrings of doubt. What if they only liked her stories because she was the girl they used to mock? What if it wasn't really her they were applauding, but the idea of a comeback? One evening, after another successful performance, Alma found herself alone by the river. The night air was cool, and the moon reflected off the water like a silver mirror. She sat down on the soft earth, her knees pulled to her chest, and let the tears come. For the first time in weeks, Alma allowed herself to feel vulnerable. "I don't want to be a joke," she whispered into the night, her voice breaking. "I want to be more than this." As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, she felt a presence beside her. Looking up, she saw Adam, his face calm but knowing. "You're asking the wrong question," he said gently. "The real question isn't whether you're more than the joke. It's whether you believe you are." Alma wiped her eyes, trying to find her voice. "I don't know how. What if it's all just a mask?" Adam smiled softly, his eyes understanding. "Then take off the mask. Be who you truly are, not who you think they want you to be." Alma stood in front of the gathered villagers, her heart beating steadily, no longer weighed down by the need to please them. She had decided to tell them a story, but not the one they expected. This wasn't a tale of animals or tricksters. This was her truth. "This story," she began, her voice strong but soft, "is about a baobab tree. a special baobab that was different from the others. The crowd, sensing the shift in Amma, fell silent. Even Kofi, who had once teased her, leaned forward with an expression of quiet curiosity. This baobab, she continued, her words flowing like the river near her home, was mocked by the other trees. They laughed at its roundness, its thick trunk, the way it took up so much space. Look at you, the tall, slender palm trees would say. You're so fat, you're taking up all the water. We can't grow with you here. Amma's voice trembled slightly, the words ringing true as she thought of her own life. The mocking, the laughter, the times she had been made to feel small because of her size. She looked out at the villagers, their faces attentive, and for the first time, she saw them not as critics, but as fellow humans, all carrying their own burdens. The baobab didn't say anything, Amma continued, a soft smile tugging at her lips. It just stood tall, its thick trunk strong and steady. And when the drought came and the slender tree's roots couldn't reach the water, the baobab's deep roots, roots that the others had mocked, sustained it. It stood tall, offering water to the animals and shade to the weary. Amma's voice grew more confident as she spoke. The memory of her own struggles, the weight of being seen as less, seemed to melt away with each word. She was telling her own story, her journey to strength and self-acceptance, through the image of that baobab tree. The other trees, she continued, came to the baobab in the end, humbled. They realized that its size was not a weakness, but its strength. They apologized for mocking it, and they asked if they could grow strong too. Amma paused, feeling the significance of the story settle over her. She wasn't just telling a tale, she was sharing the truth of her own life. She had been like that baobab, ridiculed for her size, but now she understood. The very things that others had seen as her weakness were the qualities that made her strong. There's a lesson in the baobab's story, Amma said, her eyes meeting those of the villagers. Sometimes what others mock in us is the very thing that makes us unique, the very thing that gives us strength. And just like the baobab, we all have deep roots inside us, roots that no one can see, but that hold us steady when the storms of life come. For a moment there was silence. Then, one by one, the villagers began to clap, first quietly, then louder, as the realization of Amma's story sank in. Even Kofi, who had once mocked her, stood with his hands together, nodding in approval. Amma's heart fluttered with a mix of pride and something deeper, gratitude. As the festival came to a close, Amma stood by the fire, her feet light, her heart full. She had spoken her truth, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her insecurities lift. It wasn't the applause or the approval that mattered, it was the understanding that she was enough, just as she was. Nana Essie joined her, her wise eyes sparkling with pride. "You've grown, my child," she said softly. "Like the baobab, your roots have grown deep. Now, nothing can shake you." Amma smiled, feeling the warmth of her grandmother's words. "I think I've always been like the baobab," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "I just needed to understand that my size, my story, it's not something to hide, it's something to stand tall with." The evening air was calm, the stars overhead twinkling like promises of new beginnings. Amma looked around at the villagers who had once mocked her, now smiling and talking with respect. She had no need for their approval anymore. Her strength, like the baobab's, came from within. "I think I'll tell that story again tomorrow," she said, her smile playful. "But this time I'll add a twist. The baobab learns to dance." Nana Essie laughed, her joy contagious. "Now that is a story worth hearing." Amma joined in the laughter, feeling lighter than she had ever felt before. She was no longer just the girl they mocked. She was the storyteller, the girl who had learned to embrace her flaws, and the woman who stood tall, like the mighty baobab tree. And in that moment, Amma knew. Her journey had only just begun. Days passed, and life in Anoma slowly returned to its rhythms, but Amma's transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. Her stories had become a central part of village life, and the children especially seemed to look up to her now, no longer just as a storyteller, but as someone who had overcome something many of them didn't even realize they struggled with.
Thank you for joining me today on Golden Tales by Nia. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the magic. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired.